Welcome, dear listener, to Wishcrafting, where we explore the spaces where history and enchantment meet. I'm Wishamaya, and today we're gathering at the hearth to talk about the cauldron, a vessel of fire and water, of nourishment and rebirth, and of one of the most enduring symbols and traditions around the world. Few symbols are as instantly recognizable in witchcraft as the cauldron. Whether suspended over a hearth fire or resting at the center of an altar, the cauldron represents transformation, nourishment, and mystery. But long before it became a staple of modern pagan imagery, the cauldron was an object of immense cultural and spiritual significance all across the globe. To understand why the cauldron remains such a powerful magical tool today, we have to look at its origins in hearth culture, in mythic lore, and in initiatory symbolism. So let's not waste any time. Let's explore the folklore, history, and magical use of the witch's cauldron. Historically, the cauldron wasn't a witch's tool. It was the heart of the home. In Iron Age Europe, large metal cauldrons were valuable possessions. They were used to cook communal meals, brew ale, and sustain families through harsh winters. Because food preparation was traditionally overseen by women, the cauldron naturally became associated with feminine authority and domestic power. The hearth itself was and is a sacred space. In many cultures, it was dedicated to a protective spirit or deity, like Hestia in Greece or Brigid in Ireland, and the cauldron was suspended over the hearth flame, so naturally it became a symbol of continuity. Fire beneath, sustenance within, and community gathered around. From a magical perspective, this everyday object was already performing alchemy. And I love to talk about alchemy on this podcast. We take something and we turn it into something else. In the case of the cauldron, in a very practical sense, we were taking raw ingredients and turning them into nourishment. We were surviving with the help of the cauldron's alchemy. Mythically, and across Celtic myth especially, the cauldron appears as a divine artifact. In Welsh mythology, Awen is the divine current of inspiration, a word that's often translated as flowing spirit or flowing inspiration. But that translation barely contains it. Awen is poetic fire, it's prophecy, it's spiritual insight. Awen is the moment when language opens up and something greater moves through you. It's not just creativity, but it's illumination. And in Welsh myth, the great keeper of this force is the goddess and powerful sorceress Ceridwen. According to legend, Ceridwen set out to brew a potion that would grant enlightened wisdom, Awen, to her son, who she believed needed protection in a harsh, cruel world. So, she gathered rare herbs and ingredients and she placed them within her cauldron, and she began a working that would last 1 year and a day, a time frame that appears often in Celtic lore to signify something sacred taking place. And y'all, this potion was no joke. It had to be stirred continuously. It required devotion, vigilance, and time. This kind of transformation, a transformation touched by Alwyn, could not be rushed, not even for a goddess. So, for a year and a day, the cauldron was kept hot, and it was stirred constantly. And when the brew was finally nearing its completion, the young servant boy that Caradwyn had brought on to help her with the constant stirring was named Gwion Bach. And at the time of this story, where the potion was almost done, he was on the task of tending the fire beneath the cauldron. Caradwyn was stirring the final stirs of the potion. And at that final moment, as she's stirring the very last time, 3 drops of the scalding hot potion splash onto Gwion's thumb. So instinctively, he does what we would all do, and he puts his thumb in his mouth. And that's all it takes. In one instant, this young boy is completely flooded with Alwyn, with this divine wisdom and divine inspiration and divine creative fire. All of a sudden, he's gained visions, vast wisdom, and an understanding of the nature of things. He can see, in tandem, past, present, and future. And so, most importantly, with his newly gained insight, he knows that Caradwyn is gonna be effing pissed. And what follows after is probably one of the most powerful and colorful chase scenes in mythology, in my opinion, because it's really intense, but it's also pretty funny. What happens is Caradwyn chases Gwion because she's gonna kill him. She is so angry she can't believe that he was so stupid, that he couldn't catch and control himself, and now her potion has been wasted on him instead of her son. So she chases him. And Caradwyn, who was the keeper of Alwyn, she knows how to shapeshift because she has worked with Alwyn for a very long time. She and Alwyn have a uniting already. But now so does Gwion. And so he also knows shapeshifting. So a shapeshifting pursuit happens. Gwion transforms into a hare, a fish, and then a bird. And Caradwyn, sharp as a tack and just as fast as he is, follows suit as a hound, an otter, and a hawk. And they just keep going like this, on and on and on. And finally, he becomes a grain of wheat. And so she becomes a hen. And she boop, 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 and swallows him whole. But the story doesn't end there. As soon as she swallows him whole, as a piece of grain, Chicken Caradwyn has a knowing within her before she even transforms back into her regular form. Because, like I said, she too is touched by this divine inspiration and knowing and wisdom. So she knows this path that they are both on together. And now she's frustrated. But just because she's frustrated doesn't mean she's going to fight fate. So, resigned, Caradwyn goes about her business being pregnant, and she gives birth to her now son. And Gwion is reborn as Taliesin, the legendary bard of Wales. A pretty big name and a pretty big deal. Her murderous rage that she held turns into begrudging acceptance. And then, eventually, it turns into resigned maternal care in the story. Even without consuming the potion, the goddess goes through her own transformation through the vehicle of Alwyn. but also through the actual act of working with the cauldron to brew Awen, even though she didn't, like I said, consume the potion. She didn't have to. Throughout her pregnancy, when she eats the grain and then turns back into a woman and is pregnant, throughout her pregnancy, she stays pretty steadfast on her resolve that once she gives birth, she's going to do away with the babe and she's going to have her revenge and it's going to be over. But then she sees her newborn son and she sees his innocence and his beauty because he's a baby. And she also sees the gifts that he has and that they share the gifts, one of which is prophecy. So she sees where his life is going and what he will be. And she also gets to experience some of the poetry and wisdom that he's going to bring into this world. And the cycle of life, death, and rebirth continues. And he goes on to have his own epic tale. You see, in Celtic myth, the cauldron, the womb, and rebirth are inseparable. And in this story, through the cauldron as a vessel, we learn that Awen is not simply granted. It transforms you so completely that you cannot remain who you were before you started. To be touched by Awen is to be initiated. And this initiation was birthed on its own through the vessel of the cauldron. In modern Druid and neo-pagan traditions, Awen is still invoked as a living spiritual force. It's often chanted as 3 rising syllables, A-U-Wen, and symbolized by 3 rays of light, representing inspiration flowing through mind, body, and spirit. But at its heart, the story remains simple and profound. The cauldron is the vessel of transformation. The potion, the brew, is wisdom earned through tending. And Awen is what rises when devotion meets mystery in those inspired actions. Another powerful example of the cauldron's transformative power appears in the Welsh tale Branwen, Daughter of Lir, preserved in the Mabinogion. The Mabinogion is a collection of medieval Welsh tales that blend earlier Celtic and Arthurian oral traditions. This compilation is a cornerstone of the mythic and cultural heritage of the Celtic lands, but especially in Wales. Anyway, in this story, Branwen, Daughter of Lir, we encounter the Pear de Dinai, the cauldron of rebirth. In this story, the giant king Bran the Blessed gifts his magical cauldron to the Irish king of the time as a part of a marriage alliance. At first, it's a gesture of diplomacy, but as tensions rise and war breaks out between Britain and Ireland, the true power of the vessel is revealed. Fallen Irish warriors are carried to the cauldron and cast inside, and by morning, they rise again, restored to life. But there's a terrible limitation to this power. Though their bodies are revived, they can't speak. They return animated but altered, present but not really themselves. And it's a striking image. A vessel, a magical vessel, a beautiful magical vessel that conquers death but not without consequence. Eventually, this conflict escalates to such devastation that the character Efnisien, racked with guilt for his role in the violence, sacrifices himself to destroy the cauldron. He hides among the Irish dead, gets thrown into the vessel, and once he's inside, he stretches his body until the cauldron shatters apart, which kills him in the process. And with its destruction, this cycle of unnatural resurrection ends. What becomes clear in the tale of the Pear de Dinai, or the Cauldron of Resurrection, and in Welsh mythology more broadly, is that Magic is never just a spectacle. Never. In the Mabinogion, magic is inseparable from integrity. Power is not chaotic or random, but it's relational and it responds to the moral and social fabric surrounding it. Magic isn't some idle resource ripe for the taking. When our oaths are broken, and when trust is violated, when pride overrides responsibility, magic recoils and exposes. But most importantly, it amplifies consequences. The supernatural, in Welsh lore, is concrete. It carries weight. It has legal and ethical gravity. We see this again and again. Deception leads to catastrophe. Misused authority destabilizes kingdoms. Manipulations of relationships results in exile, loss, or death. And all the while, magic never excuses poor character. Rather, it reveals it in this Welsh mythic landscape. Oaths, in particular, are sacred. Loyalty to kin, land, and rightful sovereignty forms the backbone of many Welsh tales, including this one. The Irish king that gets gifted a magical cauldron lacks integrity, and he doesn't merely lose his men or lose popularity, but as he loses his grip on this magical bounty he's been given, he loses his legitimacy. This theme runs deep in Celtic tradition, truth and moral rightness, and how they're not abstract virtues, but rather forces that determine whether power holds or whether it collapses. Even the pursuit of magical knowledge is framed not as domination, but as refinement, a quest to become the most honorable, balanced version of oneself. Transformation is not about gaining control, but about becoming worthy of the power that one carries. This is the moral current that's inseparable from the land. Welsh myth, in my observation, is rooted in reverence for place. Mountains, rivers, coastlines, thresholds. Magic flows in harmony with the natural world, and it's not something imposed upon it. When characters act in alignment with the land and community, protection and blessings follow. And when they act in arrogance or in harm, the balance shifts, often in the worst way. This idea continues into modern Welsh-inspired witchcraft and druidic practices, where magic is understood as something that is accountable, and something that will hold you accountable. Something rooted in the spirit of place and that is exercised with responsibility. In Welsh tradition, power is never separate from character, and magic is never separated from the land, and you have to find a way to walk in harmony with those things. In reference to the cauldron, and applying it to this story of this silly king, the cauldron restores, but it doesn't absolve. The vessel gives, but it doesn't excuse. That's because magic in these stories demands integrity. And perhaps that's why the cauldron of rebirth had to be destroyed. Now, in Ireland, there's a deity that has a magical cauldron. The Dagda possessed a cauldron that left no one unsatisfied. It symbolized abundance and the core values of hospitality in Celtic society. Perfect for a god known as the Good God, who has a toe in nearly every pot, every cauldron, if you will, presiding over things like fertility, abundance, agriculture, life, death, and magic. A true father figure of the Irish pantheon, it is easy to picture him seated at a long table in fairy, laughing and welcoming those at his table to have another ladle of stew, another flagon of ale, another whatever they wished from his gracious, magical cauldron. I don't know about you, but I would love to have one of those. But there are cauldrons to be found outside of myth. We have archaeological wonders to feast our minds and our eyes upon, such as the Gunstrup cauldron, discovered in Denmark in the late 19th century, and that dates roughly to the 1st century BCE, which is like 2000-ish years ago. Though it's likely of Thracian craftsmanship, it reflects Celtic iconography, including a horned figure often associated with Cernunnos. Its panels depict gods, animals, ritual processions, and possible initiation scenes, suggesting an academic, historical view that cauldrons were not only functional, but also cosmological. They represented the universe's cyclical processes of life, death, sacrifice, and renewal. And this isn't the only archaeological find in the realm of cauldrons. Many cauldrons have been discovered in bogs and lakes and are thought to have been deliberately deposited there as offerings. A fact that indicates just how close water and cauldrons share symbolic kinship. Both are vessels of depth and transformation. Now I'd like to share with you something that I adore from Irish folklore. Early Irish poetic traditions speak of 3 internal cauldrons within the human body. First, we have the cauldron of warming, and that's located in the belly, and it's associated with your vitality and survival. Then you have the cauldron of vocation, which is located in the heart and linked to calling, courage, and identity. Then we have the cauldron of wisdom, located in the head and connected to inspiration and spiritual insight. These cauldrons can be upright, tilted, or inverted depending on one's life path and spiritual development. And this belief system, once more, shows us how transformation doesn't have to be this external thing, that we can embody it, that we can work with it within all of these different aspects within ourselves, and that they are places we can go within ourselves to effect that transformation, to choose our own path, and to attune our inner compass to a true north that feels most authentically true. I could talk about the 3 cauldrons and how to work with them and where you can start for a long time, so maybe I'll put that in another episode or over on the Patreon. But for now, kind of envision them like chakras. And you can get energy work to clear and reboot your chakras. And you can do similar things with the 3 cauldrons within you, except it's a little bit more esoteric. It's got a little bit more occultism in there because you can journey into the cauldrons in so many different ways. And you can pull things out of the cauldrons. You can brew your own potions in your cauldrons within yourself. The more you work with them, the deeper and the more expansive the possibilities can get. So, just something to consider. But now I want to move on to some symbolism and correspondences within the realm of cauldrons. In modern witchcraft, the cauldron carries pretty layered common associations, which is to be expected for a symbol such as this that has so much longevity. The element that cauldrons are often associated with or paired with are water as a vessel and fire as a transformative force beneath it or within it. The direction that the cauldron is most associated with is the West because of its depth, emotion, and mystery. It's also most commonly associated with the moon for whatever reason pops into your head first, and all of the other 500 reasons it could be associated with the moon. It has divine associations with Caradwyn, Brigid, Hecate, and the Dagda, to name a few, but there are so many more. And it's associated with the themes of rebirth, inspiration, abundance, initiation, and shadow work. Also, because of its womb-like form, the cauldron is often associated with the divine feminine, though its symbolism ultimately transcends gender. And, of course, like all associations, trust what feels right for you and go with that before you go with what somebody tells you. Because that is going to be the most powerful magic for you. Before we talk about how you might incorporate the cauldron into your practice, I have a few more fun tidbits of folklore for you. Starting off with a tale from the Norse pantheon, the Norse mythology. And hold on to your butts. So, in the old Norse tales, the gods of Asgard once wished to hold a grand feast where mead would flow without end. Every party needs that. They decided that Aegir, the sea giant known for hosting the gods, should brew the drink and hold the celebration. But Aegir agreed only on one condition: that the gods had to bring him a cauldron large enough to brew mead for all of them. Okay, only one problem. There was only one such vessel that existed, and it was a massive cauldron owned by the giant Hymir, and it was said to be so deep that it could hold an ocean of ale. So, Thor set out to claim it. And when he arrived, Hymir mocked him and demanded proof of his strength before he would give up the cauldron. He challenged Thor to shatter a great glass goblet. So Thor said, "Bet," and hurled the goblet against a stone pillar. But instead of it breaking, the pillar shattered, and the goblet remained intact. So then Hymir's wife quietly gave Thor a piece of advice: that the only thing stronger than the goblet was Hymir's own skull. Taking the hint, Thor threw the goblet straight at the giant's head. This time, the goblet shattered instantly. Having proven his strength, Thor seized the enormous cauldron, real big, and hoisted it onto his shoulders. But as he began the journey home, Hymir and a host of many-headed giants pursued him in fury and retaliation. So Thor turned, raised Mjolnir, which was his hammer, and struck them down one by one until he killed them all. And with the giant's cauldron secured, he returned to Asgard. Aegir brewed the mead within it, and the gods gathered for the great feast, where the drink flowed freely and the halls of the gods rang with laughter and celebration. In my opinion, not the best show of power by the gods, but it is interesting to know. It's also interesting to know that mead itself was considered the drink of poets and gods, linking the cauldron that Thor hammered away for to knowledge and divine creativity forever. Moving on from Thor and his hammer, that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about cauldrons. So, have you ever wondered where the image of the witches brewing a potion over a cauldron comes from? Me too. I also had that wonder. But have no fear, I have found an answer for us both. We don't need to look any further than Shakespeare's Macbeth. Though by the time that he wrote Macbeth, women were already brewing lots of stuff over cauldrons. It was pretty normal at that point. Some early brewing traditions, including herbal ales and root mixtures, would have been prepared in communal cauldrons, even, and alchemical processes that's science but also kind of fucking magical took place to make those ales and roots. So the people were accustomed to seeing this in their communal spaces and in their homes. Women were brewing stuff in their cauldrons. That's what they did. But the scene with Shakespeare's witches cemented the images of witches brewing over a cauldron into popular imagination forever. Double, toil and trouble indeed. Now, in Irish and Scottish folklore, the Sidhe, or the fair folk, were said to possess magical cauldrons that never ran empty, much like the Dagdas. But mortals were warned to never steal from them, ever. And stories say that if someone took food from a fairy cauldron without permission, the food would turn to leaves, ash, or worms by the time they reached home. In some tales, however, a lucky human who was invited to a fairy feast could eat from the cauldron and return home blessed and with good fortune and inspiration all around them. The key difference here was permission. Fairy magic often hinged on hospitality and respect. In British and Scandinavian folklore, witches were sometimes said to own cauldrons that stirred themselves. These vessels didn't just cook food, they brewed weather magic, love charms, and spirit potions. Some stories describe witches placing bones, herbs, and stones into the pot and letting it simmer overnight, and by morning the cauldron might reveal visions in the bubbling liquid, functioning like a kind of scrying mirror. This idea of boiling surface revealing prophecy appears in several old magical texts. Very interesting. In some medieval folklore, enchanted cauldrons were said to reveal truth or guilt. A suspect might be made to place their hand over the boiling pot, and if the person was innocent, the liquid would remain calm, but if they were guilty, the cauldron would begin to violently boil or spit steam. This reflects a broader folk belief of the time that magical vessels could act as judges of moral order. Now, some English and Scottish ghost stories describe phantom cauldrons, which is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life, appearing near ancient ruins or burial mounds. Travelers would sometimes report hearing the sounds of bubbling or metal clanging, even though no fire pot could be seen. In a few tales, these ghostly cauldrons were said to belong to long-dead witches still brewing in the other world, and approaching too closely might cause the sound to stop suddenly, an omen that something unseen had noticed you. In parts of northern Europe, witches were sometimes said to brew storms in their cauldrons. They would stir water, salt, feathers, and herbs while chanting to summon fog, wind, thunder, and rain. In coastal folklore, Fishermen sometimes blamed sudden storms on witches stirring their pots too fiercely. It's a charming example of how everyday tools became mythic explanations for natural forces. Now, let's move on to how to work with cauldrons in your practice. There are endless ways, really. But here are several simple and practical ways to get started using a cauldron in your practice. Let's start with fire. Burning something in your cauldron or putting your cauldron over a fire, boom, simple. But burning things you fear or habits that you want to transform, what you want to get rid of, your wishes even, can all be burnt in your cauldron. And as you watch that burn to ash, you visualize the energy shifting form rather than disappearing. You are really calling in that alchemical transformation when you do something like that. You can also place a candle in your cauldron to send things into this flame from your mind, maybe like mental blocks or cords that you have to unhealthy people or situations, and have the cauldron's womb transform or dissolve it for you by way of the flame. Burn it up by way of the flame by connecting to the flame and your cauldron and trusting the vessel to do its job. And you can ritualize that as much as you want, or just do it with one candle and your focus. On the other side of things, you can place a candle in your cauldron and meditate or focus on it and notice how it's held safely within the vessel of your cauldron. And you could just sit with that sense of safety through this sacred vessel. Or if you want to go a little deeper, you can totally do that. You can ritualize it as much as you want. You can ask the flame to fill the room with the light and the safety of the cauldron being held in the womb of the cauldron and see what that feels like, or play around with something along that nature. Just to feel supported and held in a really simple ritual. The cool thing about cast iron cauldrons is that if you season them, you can actually cook in them. So you can make simmer pots in your cauldrons if you want to, and you probably should, with herbs that are seasonal or that are calling to you or that are suited to your needs. You could also supercharge your moon water by making moon water in your cauldron. Apart from that, you could consider working with it as a sacred container to place journal entries, symbols, or other things that represent your challenges inside the cauldron overnight. In this way, the cauldron serves as an energetic containment. And in the morning, you can reflect on how the energy feels different, how you feel different in your body, and go from there. These are just a few ideas to get you started, but there are so many more ways to work with your cauldron. The cauldron teaches us patience. It reminds us that ingredients must combine and that heat must be sustained and that timing matters. And in a culture that prizes instant manifestation, the cauldron offers a older lesson that transformation is a process. Whether you view it as a mythic artifact, a domestic relic, a ritual tool, whatever, the cauldron remains what it has always been, and that is a vessel, a vessel where something enters one way and it leaves another. And that quiet alchemy is where magic lives. Before you incorporate a cauldron into your magical practice, you might want to consecrate or bless your cauldron. This can be done at any time, but it is especially potent during a new moon or a seasonal transition. Ultimately, do what feels special to you. But to start, you're going to cleanse the cauldron physically first, and then you're going to light a candle nearby and place your hands over or inside of your vessel. And then you're going to say, from a grounded place, with grounded breath, vessel of fire and water, womb of becoming and keeper of change, I awaken you as sacred space. May all that enters here be transformed for my highest good. May flame guide, may wisdom rise, and may this cauldron hold my working safely and strongly. And so it is. And then you sit quietly for a few moments and imagine the interior of the cauldron filling with soft, luminous light. Whenever you feel that it is complete, you extinguish your candle, and your cauldron is now dedicated. It's dedicated as a ritual tool and a ritual space. The cauldron doesn't demand grand gestures, it only asks that you tend the fire. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you got something from it. If you want a printable version of this cauldron blessing and more on how you can start working with the cauldron, head over to my Patreon where you can become a member for $1. You'll find that and so much more over there, but if you'd like to find more of my work, please check the show notes because all that info will be there right alongside my contact information. I love hearing from you, so if you have any questions or comments about the show, please don't hesitate. I always love hearing from you. That's all for now. So, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.